こんにちは、ハリケーンフットボールです。今回の教材は、クリスタルパレスに関する動画です。クリスタルパレスは、プレミアリーグ第5節でウエストハムに勝利したことで、公式戦で17試合無敗となり、クラブ記録の18戦無敗に、あと一つとしています。次戦は、おそらく最も最難関といえるリバプール戦の予定で、とても面白い試合になるのは間違いないでしょう。今回は、ザ・ブレイクダウンのチャンネルから、クリスタルパレスの戦術を分析した動画を扱いますが、少し長かったので前半部分のみ扱っています。前回の日本代表戦であったアメリカ戦の後に鎌田大地が語ったのは、仕組みの部分はもっと明確にできるということでしたが、クリスタルパレスに、その戦術に、その仕組みがあるのか否か、チェックしてみましょう。
Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. Now this week we're here to cover one of the sort of most underappreciated stories of the Premier League season, not just already this year, but in the last season gone by as well. And that is Crystal Palace under Oliver Glasner, who have now extended their unbeaten streak in all competitions to 17 games. Okay, so this is one that I've took a lot of time to research, and I was almost begging that they didn't lose to West Ham at the weekend because I really wanted to cover sort of Crystal Palace, especially against coming up to their weekend game against Liverpool at home, which is obviously going to be the big test. But as I mentioned at the top of the video, they are 17 games unbeaten. They have won 9 of them and drawn 8, and in them 17 games, that includes their FA Cup semi-final, final, and Community Shield, where obviously they beat Aston Villa, Manchester City, and Liverpool. Very, very good opposition. And to be honest, this is a team who, despite losing Michael Elise last summer, despite losing Aberiaze this summer, have still sort of kicked on, yet to be beaten, of course, in the Premier League. They're in Europe. They beat the first team in Europe over 2 legs. And I want to really explain as to why Oliver Glasner has been so good at Crystal Palace. And I'm going to start right off just from talking about sort of what they do on the ball, probably. So if we just push on sort of the press, so if we can imagine that the blue team are pressing in a 4-2-3-1, let's say, push the counters on here. Now what they usually do is something that we've seen Manchester United do a lot, who play the same sort of formation on paper, which is this 3-4-3, is they move the middle centre-half into midfield. Now Crystal Palace don't do that. So what they do is, depending on which side the sort of goal kick is taken on, they push their wing-backs really high and wide, and they almost split their centre-halves with their goalkeeper, Dean Henderson. So if he's stepping over here, Lacroix there, Mark Gahey there, Chris Richards there, and that creates that sort of 4-back that we've said there. And if we just push it on and to see like sort of what it would look like if they were pressing man-to-man, this is almost what you get. And as you can imagine, this is a very, very sort of slippery build-up shape from Palace, because what they've got now is a goalkeeper who's able to sort of cancel out the one-man forward and be a spare man, especially if he wants to take the ball. Dean Henderson's been sort of known for the last couple of years as being a comfortable ball-playing goalkeeper. But then we've also got the wing-backs pinning high. And I want to speak to you more on the wing-backs later in the video, but just right off the top, I am going to say that since the start of the 24-25 season, Crystal Palace have scored 51 goals in the Premier League. 30 of them have been scored or assisted by their defenders. So that's wing-backs and centre-halves included, which is, believe it or not, 29% of their goals has either been scored or assisted by a defender. Now, for me, that is an absolutely crazy stat, and sort of, in comparison to the rest of the league, I think they will be well and clear in sort of defenders scoring goals. And that all comes from their build-up shape, being able to push their wing-backs forward. And with these 2 number 10s sort of drifting off Mateta, it asks the question, say we've got a team who are pressing in sort of a 4-2-3-1 like we've got on the board here. It asks the question of, if these drop down the sides, how comfortable are they with doing that? If these spin in behind, how comfortable are they going 1v1 all over the pitch? And it's a very, very interesting tactical team, and they've got a lot of sort of key facets, not just on the ball, but off the ball more importantly, which is what we'll go to speak about in a minute. But in terms of the overall game plan from Palace, they are profiling their players in positions where they work their best football. Daniel Munoz has been a player who's been one of the signings of sort of the last 18 months. He was signed actually under Roy Hodgson, but is absolutely perfect for what Oliver Glasner's trying to do. He's got probably one of the best work ethics in the Premier League. And I think his ability to sort of go from one box to the other is immense. And then if we want to push this on in to see what Palace are like if they get into the final third, So we can imagine that a team's sort of sat deeper. I'm actually going to push it a little bit towards the edge of the box. So let's say a team is defending in a 4-4-2, which is what we often see with teams like Arsenal, for example. And if we push this forward, so we got a flat line of 5 across, and we move the 2 midfielders up and the back 3 spread. So what Palace like to do in the final third, which is a real good use of the sort of the 3-4-3, and one of the sort of fundamentals of the shape which managers should be using more to get sort of touches from your fullbacks, the extra man on the back post. And that's when you're defending against a fullback. We're talking about Palace sort of playing in these really direct fashions in terms of attacking real fast. I've got their direct speed since the start of the 24-25 season. 1.9 metres per second, third most in the Premier League in that time. Their sequence time is 20th in the league. So that means the time they spend on the ball is the least out of any team. So this is a team who aren't not appreciating the ball, but are very much comfortable in playing in different ways and attacking space. So, and one more stat I've actually got is absolute width, which by Opta means how much or how wide are their constant left and right players. What's the gap between them? They have got the second sort of biggest width across the pitch out of any team since last season in the Premier League. And that's what we're going to go on to speak about now. So if you can imagine it's a 4-4-2 and Palace have sort of caught this blue team in somewhat of a transitional moment, so where the block isn't exactly locked in. If you can imagine that this is Ismail Assar and Daniel Munoz, that sort of triangle there, especially if Chris Richards is stepping up, asks the question of this centre-half to go over and help his left-back. That means that the back line has to shuffle. And already, if you go man-to-man, we've got Mateta on the right centre-half, and then the left number 10, who's actually been Yeremy Pino in the last couple of games, but has also been Kamada and Eberechi Eze last season. They sort of tuck in the fullbacks, which leaves an extra body on the back post for that sort of lofted cross to the back post, so to miss out everyone who's going man-to-man and to get that +1. And their ability to go from here to here in a really fast, direct manner and have their wing-backs on the front foot means that they cannot get the opposition's wingers back into the defensive block to cover that 1v1. And even if the opposition does manage to track the 1v1 at the back post, Daniel Munoz, Tariq Mitchell, very, very good with contact, sort of. We've seen Mitchell's volley actually scored at West Ham at the weekend. Goals like that cannot be sort of underappreciated, and they are manufactured by what Crystal Palace are doing, not just on the ball, but off the ball. And that's where I'm going to move on into now. So I'm just going to move the counters back, sort of, into Palace's 3-4-3 as we know it on paper. And then I'm going to talk to you about how they are so good off the ball, because believe it or not, Palace, not just on the ball, have been really good, but they are one of the best defensive teams in the league. And this is where all their sort of praise has come from. So since the start of 24-25, they have got 14 clean sheets in the league, which is 5th most, which means they're behind Liverpool, Newcastle, Arsenal and Manchester City. They're actually joint with Manchester City. So we're talking about some of the best teams in the league are only one more clean sheet than them since the start of last season, which just shows you how good they've been. Their direct goals, again, they're tied with Spurs, Brentford and Bournemouth. They've scored 10 since the start of last season, which is 2nd in the league. Again, we're talking about attacking big spaces. And yeah, I'm going to move on now into what sort of Palace do on the ball, off the ball, sorry, which is really interesting. So I'm actually going to move this up as if this was Aston Villa, because this is one of the games I watched it in detail quite heavily. So if we move this up to touch on sort of the 4-back, and then we've got 2 central midfielders. So Aston Villa were building with 2 central defensive midfielders here and a back 4, natural, with a front line of 4, like this. So the wing-backs are tucked in behind the wingers. The wingers were real wide, so they were really, really pinning them down, and they have a +1 advantage against sort of Morgan Rogers and Ollie Watkins. Now, with the 3-4-3, we've often seen a lot of managers use these players to run out to the fullback. So if this ball is played here, this player jumps over. That is not sort of the role of Crystal Palace, especially when they're jumping out of their block. If they are moving from the block to a press, they do it in a certain way, which I've only really seen them do with this 3-4-3 shape. And that is, these wide 10s are only responsible for sort of blocking here. If the ball is played a little bit slower and this player actually starts to run up with no sort of contact, then we drop out. But what we see a lot from Crystal Palace is sort of this stringing along of the back 5. So we can imagine that the back 5 is flattened out, and we've just mentioned they've got a +1 in the back all the time. What happens is if Tyrone Mings in this game passes it to Ian Maatson, the right wing back jumps and arrives onto the press. What does that mean now for this player? Chris Richards out, player out, and then we're man-to-man across the back line. And that is where Crystal Palace are denying teams of these opportunities, because what they're doing is not just forcing the ball wide and forcing the ball wide through this, but they are boxing out the two central midfielders for the opposition team. If we're going to preview slightly their game against Liverpool, Ryan Gravenberch and players who have played deeper for Liverpool often like to stand over here and create sort of different shapes to ask the question of the press. That might be maybe Palace's kryptonite, but in games where they're against static midfields who just play at literally a 4-2 base and these players don't move into the back line, then this sort of shield around them with Mateta, sort of Kamada, Jeremy Pino, Ismail Assar, who's out injured at the moment, this sort of completely restricts you of the space in behind the forward three. So these two players' roles is not to sort of peel out to these and make these really long bursting runs, which then can open up this. It's to just guard the centre and leave the wide areas to the wing backs to jump and the back five to string along and go man to man. So that is what Palace are doing, which is sort of unlike other teams 3-4-3 that's gained them so much success and why it's so well coached. And into the last segment now, I'm going to move on into Palace's sort of pressing approach.
次は解説です。今回はあまり難しいボキャブラリーは多くなかったので、知っておくと良さそうな動詞句と呼ばれるものなどを解説しています。それでは本日の解説をチェックしてみましょ
う。Despite losing a Berriaze this summer, I've still sort of kicked on.
キックオンという表現はサッカー解説や日常英語でよく耳にするフレーズです。直訳すると蹴って進むですが、比喩的に勢いに乗るやさらに前進するという意味になります。例えば、試合でハーフタイムの後にチームが一気に調子を上げて得点を重ねる場面で使われます。つまり、キックオンは単なる進むではなく、より勢いを増して進化するというニュアンスを含んでいます。スポーツ解説だけでなく、仕事や勉強にも応用できる便利な表現です。
Despite losing a Berriaze this summer, I've still sort of kicked on. Despite losing a Berriaze this summer, I've still sort of kicked on. This is a very, very sort of slippery build-up shape from Palace.
スリッパリーという単語は最初に滑りやすいという意味で覚えますが、実際には比喩的な使い方もとても多いです。例えば、スリッパリーポリティシャンといえば、信用しにくい政治家のことで、スリッパリーシチュエーションといえば、危うい状況や不安定な状況を指します。滑るという物理的なイメージから派生して、つかみにくいや安定しないという比喩的な意味で使われます。状況や文脈によって意味が変わるので、ニュアンスに注意して使い分けましょ
う。This is a very, very sort of slippery build-up shape from Palace. This is a very, very sort of slippery build-up shape from Palace. So we can imagine that the back five is flattened out and we've just...
フラットンアウトは、フラットンにアウトがついた形で、ニュアンスが少し変わります。基本のフラットンは、潰すや平らにするという意味ですが、フラットンアウトは、完全に平らにするや、徐々に安定するという変化のプロセスを含みます。例えば、坂道が終わって道が平らになるという自然な変化や、守備ラインが徐々に横一線に整列するという戦術的な動きを指すような場面で使われます。つまり、フラットンアウトは単なる形だけでなく、その形に変化していくプロセスを意識させる表現です。
So we can imagine that the back five is flattened out and we've just... So we can imagine that the back five is flattened out and we've just... That might be maybe Palace's kryptonite.
クリプトナイトという言葉はスーパーマンの物語に登場する功績で、彼の唯一の弱点であるものです。ここから転じて、日常英語では自分にとっての致命的な弱点や、どうしても抗えないものを表す比喩としてよく使われます。例えば、アイスクリーム is my kryptonite といえば、アイスクリームは私にとって抗えない誘惑という意味になります。ビジネスやスポーツでも使われ、サッカー解説でも、この戦術がそのチームの弱点だというような場面で使われます。覚えておくと日常会話からニュース、エンタメ解説まで幅広く応用できる便利な表現です。
That might be maybe Palace's kryptonite. That might be maybe Palace's kryptonite. So these two players' roles is not to sort of peel out to these and...
ピールアウトは、もともと車文化から生まれた表現で、急発進してタイヤを鳴らすという意味があります。 タイヤのゴムが道路に皮を剥くようにタイヤの跡を残すことから来ています。そこから比喩的に集団から飛び出すや隊列から離れるという意味でも使われます。例えば、サッカーやバスケでは、一人の選手が陣形から外れて動き出すという解説でも使われます。つまり、ピールアウトは物理的にも比喩的にも、勢いよく飛び出すというイメージを持つ表現なのです。
So these two players' roles is not to sort of peel out to these so these two players' roles is not to sort of peel out to these and the back five to string along and go man to man.
ストリングアロングという表現は直訳すると紐でつなぎ合わせるというイメージです。ここから人を騙しながら引き伸ばすや流れにただ付き合うという意味が生まれました。日常会話では期待を持たせて騙すの意味がよく使われます。一方でスポーツやサッカー解説ではストリングアロングザバックラインという表現があり、これはディフェンスラインが横一線に連動して動くという戦術的な意味になります。つまり、ストリングアロングはシチュエーションによって騙すや付き合う、連動して動くと使い分ける必要がある表現です。
And the back five to string along and go man to man. And the back five to string along and go man to man.
いかがでしたか？鎌田大地が現時点の日本代表にはないといった仕組みというものがクリスタルパレスにはあったのでしょうか？もちろんクラブと代表チームは異なるのは間違いないですが、その仕組みが何なのかというのは、いわゆる選手がどう動くべきかという最低限のルールや約束ごとのことなのでしょう。鎌田の言い方では、ボールを奪った時にどのスペースが空くかというような仕組みという表現でしたので、相手チームとのシステムの組み合わせや、その特徴や考えられるパターンを共有しておくことという意味なのかもしれませんが、誰がどこにどのようにプレスに行くのか、どのパスコースやスペースを消すのか、どこでブロックを構えるのか、プレスに行くタイミングやスイッチは何なのか、というのは、クリスタルパレスでは徹底されているようであり、それほど複雑なものではなさそうにも見えます。そんな中で公式戦17戦無敗を継続し、明らかに守備は固く、ボールを奪えば、縦にダイレクトに攻めたり、ウィングバックを最大限に使って攻め上がり、クロスを上げ、バックポストで仕留め、セットプレーでも得点を奪っているチームは、やはり強いと思えるチームです。リバプールの連勝をパレスが止めるのか、パレスの無敗をリバプールが止めるのか、非常に熱戦となりそうな試合を楽しみたいと思います。本日もご視聴いただきありがとうございました。またすぐにお会いしましょう。